Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, and we're going to talk about rocks aren't clocks. Now, Doug, what I'm excited about, because when I first heard about doing this, I thought we were going to do a subject that you and I have talked about over the years.
Yeah, we've used this title.
This title, we have. In fact, you're the first one I ever heard use this. And this gentleman, what's his name?
His name is John K. Reed, and he's actually the geology editor for the Creation Research Society. He's written this book
called "Rocks Are Not Clocks."
Aren't clocks, and I actually have been in correspondence with him. And I think maybe he got the title from me. Now, I can't verify that for sure.
Can't for sure, but
I think that I've discussed it over the CRS net for quite a number of times, and so that.
To ask him. Say, I have no problem using it. I just want to know if I could lay claim to the originality of the title.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point of it is that is a great title for this show, Doug. And this week we had a very strong, we had big national thing, the debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye the Science Guy, right?
Right. And for those of you who don't know who Ken Ham is, he's the director of the Creation Museum in the Cincinnati area, and he's also part of Answers in Genesis. He's the originator of that organization.
The first thing that amazed me, Doug, about this debate was when I looked at it, is I expect evolutionists to come down and Ken Ham. I don't worry about that. What always bothers me when Christians do the same thing. I had not seen this, so if I'm wrong, I stand correct. But I know, like Pat Robertson, I heard him say that Ken Ham should just shut up. And then and I know John Ankerberg kind of teamed up with the Old Earthers on a debate forum. Ken Ham was in it, but so was Hugh Ross. But I was listening to the Glenn Beck show this week, and he really got me mad. Mainly because it's like he's willy-nilly saying, "Why don't we really care about long ages of the world? What does it matter how old the Earth is?" And I said,
"Well, it matters because Nye. That's the first thing Nye brings up.
He spent a half an hour dealing with that very issue, and I says, if you don't understand that the age of the Earth is of critical importance, the evolutionists seem to understand. This reminds me of Jesus' words. The sons of the devil or the world are more intelligent than those who are of the people of God. And in this case, it reminds me of the same thing, because what you have, if you don't understand that the age of the Earth issue, number one, gives you the time for evolution to occur, because no one's ever seen it happen. Not in the way they describe it. Right. Evolution we've never seen a macrobiological evolutionary leap ever. But more importantly than that is if you can undermine the foundations of the book of Genesis, you undermine the foundations of the entire book of the Bible, which is their main goal, Doug. They want to destroy our foundation. If you don't understand that if the world has had death and suffering, disease and dying, if it's been messed up for millions of years and billions of years, and death did not come into existence as a result of the fall, sin, and rebellion of man, then you've negated what you've done as a Christian. You've negated the entire premise for Jesus coming. He's called the last Adam for a reason, to undo the effect of what the first Adam did, which was physical and spiritual death. If you don't get that right, the rest of it's a moot point. As a Christian, you may be able to be a Christian, but I guarantee you, your kids and grandkids won't be.
And the main points of this debate is answered in this book, Rocks Aren't Clocks. And it really comes down to assumptions behind geologic time. And and we have to understand that false ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
And we can have some certain examples, such as that of Marxism, which is I was just reading about it. You go into the colleges, and there's still some Marxists.
It's about the only place where anybody believes in Marx anymore is some college campuses.
It's all right to have theories, but you have to figure out if it actually works in reality.
Ultimately, yeah.
And you have scientific secularism, materialism, Nazism, atheism, immorality. And you have abortion and suicide and meaningless.
Well, I think the last one, using abortion, suicide, meaningless. And if you will, atheism and immorality is kind of a consequence of it. And so is abortion. So, but the meaningless part of it, we've talked about this for many, many years. If deep time is correct, there's always been death and suffering.
Right.
Then, Doug, really, the whole idea of Christ undoing the effect of a curse is really a myth. It's really, and that's what. And by the way, I believe that's why Bill Nye the Science Guy spent so much time on that subject. I says, if you don't get it, Christians, the evolutionists certainly do. They understand the consequence of a young Earth. They understand, and they don't like it. But the consequence of an old Earth, of a Darwinistic evolutionary universe, is meaningless, Doug. That is true. You know?
Now, there's a little thing that C.S. Lewis coined a number of years ago, and he coined this term chronological snobbery.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of interesting because we think that the accumulation of technology makes us smarter than our forefathers.
Okay.
And so in using this, science is viewed as the victor over oppression by religion. Now, we can't really deny that there has been a lot of cases where religion has been an oppressor. And we know that people have used false ideas and made them a religion, and it's become a hammer that is...
But I would submit, Doug, and when you get into the argument of religions, I mean, there's religions, and then there's religions. In other words, we do not have a premise in Christianity. We don't live up to it because we corrupt it, but turn the other cheek.
Right.
Go the extra mile. Where the Quran says, no, if you kill somebody in the name of Allah, you know, or if you get killed as a martyr, that's the only way you're going to get to heaven. You know, that's a whole different ball game, Doug. But that's really not what we're talking about today. But I'm saying, I only say that because oftentimes people equate or conflate, if you will, fundamental Christianity with fundamentalist Islam, and they'll put the terms together like you're a fundamentalist. I said the fundamentals of the Bible are quite different than the fundamentals of the Quran.
That's right.
Quite different. Okay. Anyway, but the idea that we are smarter than our forefathers because we have an accumulation of technology and knowledge, I would sometimes submit that it's like an adult knows and does a lot more things than an infant. Mm-hmm. But I would submit an infant is smarter than we are because they'll learn a language from nothing. Can you do that? I can't do it anymore.
No.
I can't do it. There are things they pick up like that. I think sometimes earlier civilization, they might have been smarter, Doug.
I think so.
They just didn't have the accumulation.
And they didn't have the accumulation of mutations and
no, that's the downside of it. Yeah.
And that goes back a little bit into some of our assumptions concerning what the Bible talks about versus what the secular prehistory talks about. Secular prehistory makes us believe that in the beginning our ancestors were dumb brutes just coming out of the cave. And in the 1700s, what was happening then was that they severed culture's connection to the Bible. And there was actually a method to their madness. They were talking about, and this book actually brings out a lot of what this history is, how the origin of
people like James Hutton
time.
And Charles Lyell.
And they had a axe to grind concerning divorcing the church. Churches, actually, the divine right of kings was the one thing
they hated that. Yep. But the first thing they did to divorce ourselves from the Bible was to show the chronology of the Bible was not accurate.
Right. And
that's when deep time started to be developed as early as the late.
That's what they were trying to show, but they didn't actually. They did a good job of propaganda against it, but they, when they got down into the fundamentals, they were using sleight of hand to do it.
As they still do today, as far as I'm concerned.
That's right.
Well,
and if this secular prehistory is wrong, it is detrimental to science, to history, and to society. This book talks about how this prehistory, which is before Adam and Eve, it was founded upon a series of assumptions that were interdependent with each other. And it was linked to Enlightenment secularism. And of course, we know today the geologic timescale does not match Bible history.
Yeah, Bible history, you're talking about 6,000 years, basically, versus 4.6 billion.
Right.
That's a lot of. I mean, those are two numbers. When you just hear them, okay, 4.6 just seems like a long time ago. It is is just unbelievably long compared to 6,000 years. Okay.
Yeah, if you're going to have an error, you might as well, and you're going to lie, you might as well make it big.
Let's slide big, yeah.
And that's really what it is all about. And the clerics ended up using compromise, day, age, and the gap theories to try to solve this problem.
Yeah, and that was the thing that I thought that I mean, I have not seen the debate yet, and I've got to see that, but that Ken Ham was trying to address, and he's always tried to address, is when you try to compromise with worldviews that are antithetical to the biblical worldview, you're going to get in trouble, a lot of trouble, and you end up making nobody happy. If old Earth Christians would understand, they're pretty much laughed at or ridiculed behind their backs,
right, yeah.
Maybe in front of them. The fact of the matter is that you're not, the younger Earth creationists, they'll laugh at us too, but at least they could have some respect. We are standing, we believe is the clear and straightforward recognition of what Scripture says and the way it has been interpreted up until Lyell and Darwin. Okay, pretty much it had not been interpreted any other way except by other false religions. Like you got the long ages. It goes back to the Brahmins and the Hindus and the ancient the Babylonian. It goes to pagan religious things. They had long unending eons of time. It has nothing to do with science. It's been around for centuries.
It's always been an effective tool that has been used against the church. It's been the hammer. Yep. I remember going to college and they said, "Do you believe in the Bible? Well, don't you know that the Bible does not match what you're learning in geology?" And it's going really this assumption of deep time was the key thing that they used to try to discredit.
And it still is. It still is.
Now, here's some of the assumptions of deep time. They believe that the strata were laid down over long periods of time.
Yeah, one layer looks, and it's then another one's laid up on top, and then another one's and they could have 1,000 years to 10,000 to 100,000 years for each layer of strata that they would talk about, and there could be gaps of time in between them. From what I understand, you have times where stuff gets laid down, and then you have times of stasis where nothing gets laid down. Basically, to me, it's like global warming. Mm-hmm. It answers everything, so it answers nothing.
It's a religious framework.
It pretty much is, because no one was there to see it,
And evolution assumes deep time based upon the strata. And so they believe that the fossils that you find in the strata are based upon evolution, and you calibrate these based upon the fossils that they use index fossils. So they say, well, if you find the brachiopod, it's here. If you find the dinosaurs, well, it's Jurassic.
Well, if you find a coelacanth, it's here.
Yeah, that's right. And
that's a fish.
And so they use this as a framework for interpreting the history of the Earth. A lot of people don't understand that Enlightenment stratigraphers, the people who actually founded this idea, they'd already rejected the Bible timeline.
Yeah.
And so they made that assumption from the beginning. And so they did not derive these dates from the rocks.
So what they did is they tried to make their conclusions fit their a priori assumptions.
That's right, okay. Yeah.
All right.
And so the chronological sequence of events that they presumed was in the rocks was arbitrary. It wasn't really something that they measured. You can't go to the rock and say, well, this piece of granite is 5 million years old.
Well, I find it ironic because when they first came out with these dates, would they have the world was 100,000 years old or maybe a million years old and it slowly it just kept expanding. I find from a creationary standpoint, we sort of going the other way. I remember when Henry Morris and Whitcomb come out with their book, The Genesis Flood. They were willing to give like 10,000 years, and I thought that was like astounding. Now I said, the biblical thing, it's about 6,000 years. That's about all it is, and you can't get much more out of it. And the more you look at the chronologies, the way it's written out, very tight chronologies written in there, there's not room for a lot of gaps of even hundreds of years, let alone thousands.
Few of us that use the Septuagint to try to add a little time.
You're going to get 1,000 years out of it,
And so the assumption is that the rock correlation has some sort of meaning.
Right.
But as you and I have observed, like going into different places
Yeah.
in the world, such as Las Vegas, where the rocks are all sequenced, there's places in the Grand Canyon where
Glacier.
Glacier
The
National
loose
Park,
overthrust.
and the Empire Mountains. We saw that the rocks were all sequenced there. So the question is, well, if they're upside down, well, how did they get that way? Well,
Again, they have
make some-
explanations.
they have to come up with a
Ad hoc
explanation.
They have to,
for
after
it.
the fact, they have to come up with
A
something.
rescue mechanism to rescue their theory from all this things that doesn't fit with it. Now, radioisotope dating is another thing, and he does get into the radioisotope dating into this book, but it's sort of like an afterthought after going into how the history of the dating.
Well,
dates.
Doug, we have a very good set of books from the rate thing that really goes into a lot of this.
Right, yeah.
Much more depth at this. This is a fairly small tome. And the rate books, you got a couple of thick volumes there, you know.
Yeah, I had to laugh. We're going to have a Creation Research Society conference in August coming up, and
Okay.
and Danny Faulkner was talking about kidding around and giving names of different projects that were rejected by the quarterly. And one of them was by Gene Chafin. He was going to call it a second-rate project.
Oh no, that would be a bad name, yeah. But no, you got to be careful because the evolutionists jump right on that one. But the thing is, something you talked about earlier, before radioisotope dating. When did that come in? The early 20th century, carbon-14, I think. Some of those.
Carbon-14 was 1953.
Oh, that late. Well, did they have any earlier than 53?
No.
So that's really late. This dating of the rocks, the stratigraphy, the rock strata, different, that goes back to the very beginning. Charles Lyell in 1825, when was the book written? Principles of Geology, 1825. James Hutton, 1795. I have a book called The Devonian Controversy, written in 1809. Mm-hmm. They've already had all the age of the fishes, the clams, the dinosaurs, the mammals. They had that already laid out before radioisometric dating ever came up. And it's interesting because John Wood Morphy and others, many others, have shown a lot of the flaws of radioisotope dating. And we'll probably have to go into those, Doug, shortly if you want to go about some of that stuff.
It all
There's a lot of flaws
came
in
from the
it.
Great Chain of Being. That was the framework that they started out using. And it's sort of like a pagan concept that they...
Well, Erasmus Darwin has a logo, and I think it was in Latin, it said, "From shells everything." Mm-hmm. And that was long before Charles Darwin. That was his grandfather, I think, Erasmus Darwin, 18... Was that 18?
Well, here we'll talk a little bit about how radioisotope dates.
Yeah, that's why I want to get into that. So
they were actually calibrated by the sequence that was established long ago by Lyell, and it sort of creates an illusion of accuracy because they'll say something is 4.6 million years old, plus or minus 210,000 years or something like that.
yeah.
And this accuracy that what they're actually doing is measuring the proportion of parent and daughter elements in the rock.
Well, what we mean by that by parent, if you have a parent element would be like the most radioactive, and it loses isotopes like uranium.
Right.
And the end product of uranium after a long period of time would be lead. Okay. So, but they have lead. They have all kinds of different ones they use, but the parent and daughter, so when you use those terms, so you understand what we're talking about. So what happens is you can measure rates of decay, okay?
And what the plus or minus is in the dates that they give is the accuracy is based upon the measurement capacity of the machine and not the accuracy of the assumptions behind that. And so you can give this illusion that you're coming up with an accurate absolute date for this particular rock, but it isn't really true.
So Doug, let's go through some of the assumptions. There's a litany of these, and why don't you read them down there and talk about it a little
Okay,
bit.
here's the assumptions of radioisotope dating methods. You have to assume that the decay rate doesn't change. And we can't really verify this because we can't go back in time and see whether or not there was anything that changed.
No, but we do have some modern anomalies, shall we say, and we've pointed this out on other shows, Doug. When you talk about certain volcanoes or certain places that we know when they actually were formed, and their dates give you millions of years or hundreds of thousands, and we know they're like 50 years old.
We know there's something wrong.
Yeah, we know there's something wrong.
Experimentally,
okay?
by dating something where we know when the rocks were formed, we'd expect a young date and you get an old date. Okay.
Well, the other thing is, Doug, is we also have dates that give even evolutionists conniption fits. You'll have rocks that'll date you at 20 billion years old or something. Well, they throw those out.
Right.
Okay. So what's happened is, how do you go in the past to measure that, Doug? And that's the reality. So
and here's been my theory for many years, is that you have leaching of isotopes in and out other samples, so that you have the dates are skewed. And one example of that would be like rubidium and strontium. Rubidium is a alkali metal, which is one that forms salts that are easily dissolved in water, whereas strontium it's got a double bond, and so the salts that are formed by strontium is much tighter, and it's less likely to
leach out, huh?
To leach out because it's.
How about uranium salts?
Uranium's the same way.
How about potassium?
Potassium's the same thing, the alkali metal.
See, I'm looking at all these that water can influence, and I think of something from a biblical construct like called Noah's flood, Doug.
Right.
Do you think that might have changed something? Okay, just speculation here.
This is something that I haven't verified for myself, but I've heard that there's been studies where people have actually poured water onto a rock, and had a running water on this rock for a while, measured the date of it beforehand and measured it afterward, and found that it raised the date when you had running water over it.
Well, we should verify that. That would be interesting if it was true. That's an experiment, by the way, Doug, because of the evolutionists or the long agers' a priori commitment to long ages, deep time. They would never do that experiment.
Right.
Just like some of the other ones we'll talk about in a second here. We're out here. So what else, Doug?
The third assumption is that there would be no daughter isotope that would be present when the rock was formed. Now we know that in the case of potassium argon, argon is a gas, and it actually is something that as a volcano erupts, you get some mixture of that in the molten rock as it
You get both
gets
potassium
formed.
and argon, or what?
And so if you have a potassium argon date of the Hawaiian lavas, you get a highly millions of years of age.
Yeah.
And then we have to assume that there are no outside forces such as temperature and pressure were changed. That they remained constant and did not affect the date of the rock.
And you could see those just in present day observation, that those don't even stay constant
Right.
in observable time, let alone deep time. Well, okay, what else we got?
Now,
Doug?
here's some questions that this author had. John K. Reed is the author. He's, like I said, the geology editor for the Creation Research Society. He had these questions when he was in college. Doesn't science play a role in geologic history? Don't geologists observe rocks in the field? Don't they draw conclusions on the large scale based upon experimental evidence obtained in the laboratory? Don't we have mathematical formulas for deriving water flow and velocities from grain size and sedimentary bedding? Can't we correlate the crystallization temperature and pressure from mineral composition? The answers to all of these is not really.
No.
And here's the reason is that, and what we have is a mixed bag here. We have a misunderstanding of what what we do to make these decisions. You have science as a philosophy. You have which you would have ongoing processes that are repeatable, mostly observed, and relies principally on measurement and observation. Whereas history, you have unique events It's unrepeatable. It's not directly observed, but you might have an observer in the past.
Right.
And their history relies principally upon the testimony of that observer.
Of that original observer, yeah.
And failure to recognize the limits of these of science and history leads to distortion and faulty conclusions. And geologic history is a perfect example of a mixed question. And so here are a few more assumptions that are really false. Geologists believe there's historic content in the rocks. That's the subject of this book. Rocks aren't clocks. There is no other relevant source of historical information. In other words, it discounts anything from history. The position of the rocks tell the relative ages. Now, we know that the position of the rocks is all skewed up from what we've seen. The vertical positions, that's the essence of their history. The formations were deposited slowly, and we don't know that. We know that.
We know for sure, at least in the case of Mount St. Helens, Spirit Lake, that's not the case.
Erosion hasn't removed the evidence. The local column fits the geologic timescale. So these are all assumptions. But here's some hidden errors. We are ignoring the war of the worldview. We're conceding the separate prehistory. We are assuming that natural history is just a science, assuming that rocks are just like history books. And so this is the philosophical foundations of the time scale. You have evolution, uniformitarianism, and deep time, and these are the foundations. If you can show that these three tripods to the time scale are false, then we will see that there's no meaning to what the rocks say. Now, I had to tell you, there's a convention that is being used now, which they've now abandoned radioisotope dating pretty much. Instead, what they're using is what they call GSSPs. And the GSSPs are global strategic strata positions or points, and they establish these by committee. And there's a
so what we have is consensus science.
And that's really what is going on now, is that you really can't do it unless you have your dates approved by a committee now.
Oh boy. Yep.
So that's the state we're at with the revolution against evolution. We'll see you next time.